Hi, I'm David McKay, and I'll be reading from my translation of The Just by Jan Brokken. This is from Chapter 11, Not a Chance in Hell, but Who Knows? To avoid trouble, Zwartendijk made sure to stop working by 7 p.m. or 7:30 at the latest, but he never paused even for a minute. He ate nothing all day long, drank only cold coffee, and barely took the time to light his cigarettes. The number of visas became an obsession. 40 more today than yesterday. 50 more. 60. He was so intent on his work that on the 29th of July he forgot his own birthday. His wife Ernie and the children shared his constant preoccupation, so they forgot too. It wasn't until that night, as Ernie was getting into bed, that she said, with a blend of surprise and regret, "Oh my goodness, Jan, you turned 44 today." Zwartendijk's laconic reply was, "We'll celebrate next year, if we're still alive." He had no way of checking who these people were. After a hurried glance at the applicant's face, he would ask for the name or read it in the passport and start writing. He saw the fingers handing him the document, sometimes trembling, sometimes calm. He saw a hand, perhaps old and wrinkled, perhaps young. He heard a voice, deep or high-pitched or scratchy, saying "ja" and "nein," or yes and no. Many refugees spoke English to him, imagining a consul from a Nazi-occupied country would hate the German language. That was also why they called him Mr. Radio Phillips. Every day Ernie came to watch, with his children Edith and little Jan at her side and Robbie in her arms. It was frightening, Edith recalled. The line of applicants stretched far outside the consulate, all men, of all ages, but most of them fairly young. Their wives and children had stayed behind in the Kaunas or Vilnius ghetto. It was very rare for a woman to accompany her husband to the Dutch or Japanese consulate. The men sometimes stood in line for days in the burning sun, exhausted, hungry and thirsty, clamoring for water. Fights kept breaking out. Once the men were inside, they became more aggressive, especially when closing time approached, and they started to worry they wouldn't reach the head of the line that day. Zwartendijk understood how tense their situation was. He remained calm. Eyewitnesses say his composure was exemplary. When it all became too much for him, he would light a cigarette, but after a single puff would return to writing with perseverance and growing haste. Sometimes a story slipped out, compressed into a few brief statements, a story that gave him the strength to go on, and strengthened his conviction that he was doing the right thing. "Your name and your nationality?" "My name is Abram Marbur. I come from Turek, which is near Kalisz, in Poland. I was on the road for weeks. I walked until I wore out my shoes, and went on with rags wrapped around my feet. I was attacked, beaten, and chased away. I hid in the woods in the daytime and walked on at night. Once in a while, in a village, a peasant would give me something to drink. I lived on raw potatoes I dug up with my bare hands. I wasn't much more than skin and bone by the time I reached Vilnius. The Lithuanian Red Cross gave me clothes and shoes. In Vilna I heard about Mr. Radio Phillips and the Japanese consul. It took me 5 days to walk to Kaunas." He told his story in a steely voice, emphasizing every word. When Zwartendijk handed him the passport with the visa for Curacao, Abram Marbur said, "Thank you, Mr. Consul. I know I will survive." Abram Marbur had an unconquerable will to live. He found his way to an American aid organization that paid for his one-way ticket to Vladivostok on the Trans-Siberian Express. From Vladivostok, he took the Osaka Shosen Steamship Company's Amakusa Maru to Tsuruga, Japan. As the coast drew near, he saw snow-capped mountains. Like most Jewish refugees, he took the train to Kobe, where he was placed in a camp not far from the harbor. He remained there until late 1941. After the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor and the American declaration of war, Marbur and all the other Jewish refugees in Kobe were sent to Shanghai. For a long time, Zwartendijk believed that most of the refugees would make it no further than Irkutsk, and that only a scattered few would slip through the net. Or no, Edith tells me, actually it wasn't that simple. One day he might think they would all make it. The next day he'd say it would be almost impossible for them to travel straight across the Soviet Union and reach Japan. Impossible, he'd cry. Not a chance in hell. Then he'd add, but who knows? One morning at 6:15, the city was already heating up in the bright sunshine. Zwartendijk muttered over breakfast, I have to do something, because I can't do nothing. But there are so many of them. If only I'm granted the time. Time, that's what it comes down to. He looked up and saw not only his wife at the counter staring at him, but also Edith next to her. He bolted down his tea, stood up, pulled on his jacket as he headed out to the car, and drove off to another long day at the office. Thank you.